Let's hear from a French-Algerian journalist, Nabila Ramdani, who specialises in Islamic and Middle East affairs and spent much time in Syria over the years. Nabila, how serious is this situation? Is it overstating it to compare it to 1914?
Well, I think the first thing that I think is crucial to say is that France and its Western allies have been bombing Syria continually since the end of 2015. So this is all a continuation of actions started following the establishment of the Daesh caliphate. And I think what is absolutely clear is that these new strikes are absolutely tokenistic in nature and perhaps primarily designed for the world's media rather than for any significant strategic advantage. These are in the end high publicity, low impact bombing runs, pretending to have some kind of strategic impact on Syria's capacity to create chemical weapons. And the very most that the Western governments will achieve is a chance to feel good about themselves because they actively appear to be doing something. And this, I'm afraid, is increasingly how the West prosecutes its wars in the Arab and Muslim world.
So are we in a situation where we're sort of half in, half out, and really we should be one or the other? Right? Either we should be fully involved in what's happening or we should stay out of it.
But I think you have a scenario here where you have three of the most powerful countries in the world, the US, Britain and France, which have launched a small but significant portion of their arsenal on a sovereign Middle East state in a bid to what effectively, to make what effectively amounts to a moral point. All are by any kind of logic absolutely fine with devastating weapons of war being used to kill civilian populations, but they want to draw the line at chemical weapons and jargon.
Well, there has been a line drawn at chemical weapons for over a century, hasn't there? Are you saying that line is actually an artificial line?
Yes, I think one of the most peculiar aspects of this latest adventure is the jargon which accompanied these strikes includes the expression punishment bombing. And yet within hours of it happening, the French foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, said he wanted an immediate return to diplomatic effort to end the conflict. So, we had the absurd situation where the French minister saying that the attacks were not meant to be confrontational. And I think the major concern was clearly that Russia might react badly. But they also wanted to keep the Syrian regime as happy as logically possible so that some kind of peace negotiations could resume. It all, frankly, came across as a very cynical power game where everybody is a victor. Assad remains more defiant than ever. The Western coordinated rebuke can claim it has sent a strong moral message to Assad. Russia and its forces on the ground have not been hit directly and so don't need to respond. Meanwhile, this creates a distraction from Palestinian protesters currently being killed by Israeli forces, while a horrendous war is being prosecuted by Saudi Arabia in Yemen as well. And so I think when Trump claims that mission has been accomplished, there shouldn't really be any sense of triumphalism in all this.
So what can we do? Because it seems to me that because of the Russian veto in the Security Council, the United Nations, which is designed to try and solve issues like this and deal with problems like this, is more or less stymied and paralysed. The talks, such as they are in being held between the various factions in Syria, seem to be going nowhere. Assad, with the Russians and Iranian backing, seem to be winning the war on the ground. I mean, what should we do?
Well, I think the only real way of stopping the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian war is to actually stop the Syrian conflict. And these strikes will prolong the war.
How do we do that?
I think it's important to bear in mind that chemical weapons have been used consistently in Syria. They are already normalized. So going to war over the type of weapons being used is absurd and is, dare I say, a cynical approach to the science of killing effectively. Our problem with warfare today is that all of us are conditioned to see it as some kind of clinical video game, which we always win, and images and footage of slick aircraft and missiles being pounded in the sky of Damascus and looking all like a Hollywood movie are by no means a solution. I think the United Nations is vetoed by so-called civilized nations, and so the power play just goes on, and that's what we should be working on resolving, rather than simply launching yet another futile military raid.
But how do we do that? How do we de-escalate? I mean, is it a case of the West saying, well, you know, Iran's interest in Russia and Russia's interest in Syria is greater than ours. Maybe we should just let this play out and let there be some sort of client state in Syria. Is it as basic as that we just basically have to say the West has lost?
No, I think you're right to highlight a stark choice there. If we overdo it, and that is to say bomb Assad out of power, of course there's an upside because he would be gone. But there's also a downside, which is that the Daesh caliphate can take over. Now, I don't want to sound like a ridiculous idealist, but we need to see a sea change in the international diplomatic system. We need to use vast improvements in international communications and shared interests within the global system to start working through these crises without resorting to the old knee-jerk reaction, which is always war.
Nabila, thank you so much. Nabila Ramdani, French-Algerian journalist.